Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us here tonight for tonight's timely webinar, Reading Between the Lines, Recognizing Red Flags and Supporting Our Teens, Ending the School Year Strong and Preparing for the Summer. I'm Kali Namdar, Resilience Programs and School-Based Services Director from OHEL. Tonight's webinar and panel discussion is brought to you by OHEL's Helpline for Camp Staff, which offers confidential support for camp staff over the summer. And we're open 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday through Wednesday. During the school year, we're open for educators as well. And we're extremely grateful to the support of UJA Federation New York. And we're also proud to partner with OHEL's Camp Kaylee, Be Well Miami, Prisma, and Sephardic Bikur Chalim SBH for tonight's webinar. I just want to give a big thank you to our program manager, Adiva Pomerantz, for her help in putting tonight's program together. As the school year winds down and summer is around the corner, many teens and preteens are navigating all kinds of emotions. There's stress, there's relief, there's excitement, and there's also uncertainty, as much as they don't want us to know. For parents, caregivers, educators, this transitional period is really crucial to not only celebrate the achievements of our students or our children or the youth that we support, but also to tune in more closely to what might be the signs that our teens are struggling and they're feeling a little bit uneasy. For some teens, summer means it's time to relax and maybe explore new opportunities like camp. But for others, it may bring new pressures or isolation. Whether teens are preparing for a summer of structured activities or heading into the unstructured freedom of vacation, this transition time is really crucial to tune in, to read between the lines and ensure that our teens are not just physically ready, but emotionally supported for what lies ahead. And tonight's conversation is really about emotional wellness. It's about communication and it's about connection. We're going to explore how to spot red flags that might indicate that a teen needs our support and how to approach teens with empathy, insight, and action that is really supportive. We're also going to share some practical strategies for helping teens finish the school year with confidence and enter the summer feeling supported and feeling empowered. So whether you're here tonight as a parent, an educator, a youth support professional, a camp counselor, we want to thank you for joining us, and hopefully together we can create a safety net of awareness and care that helps our teens thrive through the transitions ahead. Throughout tonight's webinar, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box, and we're going to do our best to answer them live. And I want to introduce our incredible panelists for this evening. Sharon Darack is the Assistant Director of CCSA, Communities Confronting Substance Use and Addiction at OHEL, and she brings with her a wealth of experience in the addiction world, having spent 15 years at JAX, as well as overseeing trips to Israel for those in recovery for over a decade. Sharon served as the North American Director for OU Israel Free Spirit Birthright for the past 4 years, and has over 28 years of experience counseling families and conducting educational programs while also raising awareness about substance use and alcohol within the Jewish community. Shoshana Farbman is the Be Well Miami Director at the Greater Miami Jewish Federation, where she oversees the development and implementation of Be Well Miami, which is geared toward providing education resources and tools to support adolescent mental health and wellness within the Jewish community. Shoshana is a licensed clinical social worker, and she's been working with young adults and teens throughout her career for 20 years, first in New York, where we're from, and working with children and families in the child welfare space and with adolescents involved in the juvenile justice system. Upon relocating to South Florida 9 years ago, she's worked in the teen department at SAGE and as a therapist at a local university. And as the Be Well Miami Director, she brings a passion for educating about and supporting adolescent mental health, destigmatizing seeking help, and promoting overall positive mental health within the Jewish community. She also brings with her a lifelong love of camp, having been a Jewish day camp camper and counselor for many years, and a staff member and group leader of many different Jewish teen summer programs. And lastly, Dr. Rayzel Yaish received her PhD in clinical health psychology from Furkov Graduate School at Yeshiva University, and is the clinical psychologist at Mayonot Yeshiva High School for Girls. She's worked with teens and the special health needs population of all ages for many years as head counselor at both Camp Hask and Camp Simcha. and Dr. Yaish consults and presents workshops and talks for local and national organizations on topics related to Torah, mental health, general health, and the specialized needs community. She also maintains a private practice servicing primarily adolescents, emerging adults, and the specialized needs population. Okay, so let's begin with our first question for our panelists this evening. And again, if anybody here wants to drop a question in the Q&A chat, please do so. We'd be happy to answer your questions live. So for our panelists this evening, we've called tonight's webinar Reading Between the Lines, Recognizing Red Flags and Supporting Our Teens, Ending the School Year Strong and Preparing for the Summer. What comes to mind for you? What's your initial impression from your vantage point in the work that you do with youth, in the work that you do in camps, when you hear this title?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'll go first. Hi, thank you so much, Carly, for that lovely introduction. And we're so pleased. I'm so happy to have the opportunity to be on this dynamite panel of incredible presenters. So thank you. I think for me, when I think about this topic of understanding or recognizing red flags, I think for me, when we talk about teens, it's really looking at what's being said and what's going on with them as we see the school years coming to an end, and what the teens are dealing with can roll over into summer camp or into home life, looking at the stress and anxiety. They're worried about their grades, friendships, and their futures. And really, some of them are also, how are they dealing with their mental health as that progresses into summer, and thinking about us understanding what are those flags as we move into camp life or back into home life, or just hanging out in the summer. And so I feel it's so important for us as parents, as educators, as counselors, to really think about identifying and understanding what those red flags are. Some of them are really obvious, and some of them are really not. They can be subtle, and it's really learning and understanding what that looks like.
Okay, any of our other panelists want to comment?
Yeah, I'll jump in next. What I was thinking about when I read the title, and it kind of was supported when I spent my day at work today at my own high school. And also thank you, and very exciting to be with such amazing youth professionals and to hear what you're going to say as well. And thank you all for the opportunity. That I think about how individual teens are. Even just today, people make a lot of assumptions and globalizations about what teens can't do, what they should and shouldn't do, and what they will and won't do. And even in my office today, I had someone who was dealing with a mental health challenge, and all she's waiting for is camp to come. Like, camp will solve everything for her. And she just, when camp comes, it will all be good, and this will all be behind her. And then right as she left the office, 3 girls sat on my couch saying, whatever happens in this room, no one is allowed to say the word camp, okay? Because that's going to stress me out. So not one of you is going to say anything about camp, right? And they all made this decision together. I was thinking, like, just within seconds of each other, just the meaning of camp for these girls from the same grade was totally different, and for different reasons, of course. So I guess as we talk tonight, and as people at home, parents and camp professionals, all of us who are here because either we love camp, and running a camp is no easy job. So if anyone's here from that end or thinking about what it's like, then they're here because there's a passion for trying to do right by children and teens, and the families that believe in them. And I think we'll just keep our minds to all the different possibilities that a teen can look like when a red flag or a non-red flag is happening in the summer.
Great, thank you so much. Shoshana.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for having me tonight. I'm so excited to be here, and just want to echo what my fellow panelists said, of just thrilled to be with this group of amazing professionals. So I think, just to add, I mean, Rayzel and Sharon said it really beautifully, but I think that when we're thinking about the idea of reading between the lines, I think I like to think a lot about, with teenagers especially, thinking about how we are meeting them where they are, and that means something different for every individual. Just, Rayzel, as you just shared about, within seconds, these different students in your school having such different vantage points, and that for one individual, the summer may be a breath of fresh air, right? Their school year may be have been super stressful, and they're excited to have a lack of structure. And for another teen, that lack of structure may be terrifying to them. Or if they're in the camp setting, right, being with a different social group and all those different things. So I think it's really thinking about all those nuances and knowing that every individual is experiencing their summer differently, right? For one, as we've heard, it could be something super exciting and they can't wait for that last bell to ring at the end of the school day on the last day of school. And for others, they can't wait for the first day of school to start again and for summer to be over. So I think it's just seeing all those different vantage points and thinking about what are we looking out for and how can we be proactive in every situation.
Absolutely. I remember I used to work, actually, one of our partners tonight is Camp Kaylee. And for many years, I was the psychologist during Girls Month in Camp Kaylee. And I had I worked in a school all year long. And then I was in the summer supporting students and campers. And, one of the things that we know is just we can never assume. We really don't know unless we ask. And we really don't know what everyone is coming to camp with, what people are holding and what's going on in their minds as they're entering camp and as they're leaving camp. So definitely something really great to keep in mind. Sharon, I want to address this next question to you. From your experience dealing with substance use addiction and within the Jewish community with our youth, what are the current trends that you're seeing in terms of substance use for teens? And can you please talk to the prevalence of use and exposure and maybe, some of the things for us to keep in mind as we're heading into the summer for our youth?
Great, thank you. So what we see, right, and again, CCSA and the work we're doing is in Jewish day schools across the country. We are in over 96 schools. So I just really share from what we're literally seeing within the Jewish day school systems. And so I think for us, what we're seeing is, I would say 4 areas that we're seeing. We're seeing the alcohol use, right? And again, it's not just that someone is addicted to alcohol, we're just seeing the misuse around alcohol, whether it's being in their homes or whether they're doing socially or peer pressure or they're self-medicating around alcohol. We're seeing nicotine products such as vapes, Zyn are those nicotine pouches that you put in your mouth. We see the teen use around that. And that's really a sneaky one, the Zyn, because it looks like candy. It comes in these candy containers. Vapes are very obvious, but the Zyns are not. And so it's an easy hide that someone might put the pouch in their mouth and they get a rush of nicotine from it. And then we're also looking at cannabis products, right? Marijuana, THC, CBD products are now being sold in many different ways, from edibles to smoking it through a vape. And again, we're seeing edibles are very popular among our high schoolers. And then really we're seeing more and more of is more the increase of is the process addictions, where behaviors such as exercising, gaming, social media, and that compulsive internet use, pornography, we see all of those around the process addictions. So I think when you think about what's happening in the school year, this is that, and they're in that structure. And then when you come to the end of the school year, now we're looking at moving into summer camps. That doesn't get left behind, right? So we have to think about how does that transfer across? Like, is it that easy to give up your love for vapes or alcohol, or when you are so addicted to your electronics or your devices? So we have to start thinking about how do we detox them off, right? Or how they move across into camp life and how that looks like. But I would say those are the most 4 trends we're seeing right now. Well, 4 behavioral addictions: alcohol, cannabis products, and the nicotine products.
Thank you. Thanks for mentioning that about the process addiction. I think a lot of, the beauty of summer camp is that many camps, the kids are not having their electronics, but sometimes these teens are coming as staff as well, and they don't fit that. They've got to juggle the role of being, we shouldn't forget that sometimes the counselors in our camps, most often they're teenagers themselves. So they may be coming to camp also with these struggles. That's
exactly. And it really crosses over. And in our programming, we talk to students many times about thinking about how can I have fun without being dependent on my devices or these unhealthy behaviors that I might be having around these alcohol use or these different products. So we're trying to, again, encourage them to think about different ways as you step into summer. What does that look like in camp life? How are you able to tap into those healthier behaviors, those healthier activities, those fun activities? We want you to learn how to have fun without being dependent on these substances.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. By the way, anybody in the audience, if you have a question, you are welcome to put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to answer your questions live. Okay, let's remember for a second where our teens are coming from as they come to camp this year, okay? What are some of the, we've heard about some of the substance use challenges and process addictions that teens might be struggling with, but what are some of the specific challenges in closing out the school year for middle school and for high school students? And in addition to that, can you also tell us what have you found that really, really works in addressing each of them? Shoshana and Rayzel, if we could hear from you, that would be great.
Rayzel, would you like to start as someone who's directly in a school, and then I can piggyback?
I will start that up, and then you can jump in with me together as we move from school to summer. I mean, right now in the school, it's high stress mode. Even for those who are less stressed by school than by camp or unstructured time. Most high schools, at least in the Metro New York, New Jersey area, are like really closing down. Some even at the end of this week. I don't know about the sunnier states, may already have been closed down, but they're starting to end. It's entering into finals and closing up for the year. And our senior students are really looking at the end of their high schools, and our 8th graders are closing up with graduation, and everything's moving pretty quickly. There's a lot of joke in Jewish education that school's really over after, Passover holiday, which if you're really in it, it's really not true. But the concept makes sense because everything starts to move really, really fast after that time period. All the different holidays, the Jewish holidays of the Israel days and the Holocaust days, there's just a lot that's happening around the school pressure. So I think one thing that pops up a lot is a great increase in anxiety, and anything that you were able to sort of push off all year because there was more time to solve it, or even the school maybe had less pressure. We could pull a few threads of waiting a little longer, or, kind of trying this idea or that idea to help a student who is struggling. Now we're really looking at the end in the face, and a lot of decisions have to be made, and the anxiety starts to peak. And that also means that parents get more stressed because they see that there's things that have or haven't worked. And I would say that is one huge, huge stress that I think how it pertains, I guess, to camp is sort of a recognition of where you're getting that student from. So if they've made it to camp, then already that's a good sign in many ways. It means they were allowed to go to camp. They didn't have to, stay at least for this summer and do some work, or they're well enough to, be viewed by their parents and themselves as being able to go to camp, and they're already in a state that is positive. And I think the other piece that, before we get to like what really works in those cases, as we see this spike in addiction, and I used to fight that, like, is there really like a spike in addiction in general in teens? And specifically at the end of the summer, at the end of the school year, I wouldn't have fought it, but take the two levels, the spike in addiction we are indeed seeing in the teenage population, really across the international world, and then add that to the end of the year, and it's a unique mix. And then socially, which we'll get into a little more afterwards, ranging from the younger teens to the older teens, the teenage stages are so fast and intense and felt so deeply and viscerally without the benefit of all the frontal lobe pieces that we have to process and the experiences and the discomfort in learning how to communicate and ask for help, and from speaking to parents now to speaking to teachers. There's so many different ways that teens are learning to navigate their social spaces that also is just ever fluid and always a stress also at this time of the year. So I would say that let me let Shoshana add a little bit, and maybe we'll together both move into some of the solution spaces.
Sure. I think just to echo a little bit of what you said, Rayzel, I think if we're thinking about especially that end of middle school, end of high school, those last couple of years, I think I work a lot with juniors in high school, and what I have found right now for them in particular, right, when it comes to thinking about all the AP exams they just took, and then they're still prepping for finals in a lot of their classes that aren't their AP exams. And then, even if they're going to camp or on a summer program to Israel or something like that, they are thinking about, and this isn't necessarily just 11th graders, but they are thinking about, okay, when am I taking my ACT or my SAT? Am I doing, am I going to Israel for the year after senior year? Am I applying straight to college? What am I doing? And so the brain is never stopping, right? So even if they have a fun experience that they're about to embark on over the summer, or they have a chiller summer, they still their minds are not thinking and stopping and thinking and planning, right? And for a lot of them that are higher achievers, and even for the ones that maybe school doesn't come as easily, it may be this time, right, from both middle schoolers and high schoolers, that they're thinking, okay, maybe they do get to go to camp, but they also have a lot of summer work they have to do because maybe the school year isn't ending as positively. And so they're coming into these experiences, as we said a few minutes ago, with all these other things happening. It's not just coming into the experience in a vacuum. And so it's how are we thinking about when they're coming into their Israel trip, or they're coming in to be a camper or to work at camp, what else are they coming in with? And how are we, as I said before, how are we meeting them where they are? And so, Rayzel, I'll turn it back to you for a moment, and then we can.
You made me think of some things because, when you're talking to a friend and you're being a great listener, right? One of the rules of thumb we know is that you shouldn't always turn it back to yourself, right? Don't listen to what they need, and don't always turn it back to yourself. But I find that teens today are thirsty to hear your experiences. They're learning from all the shared experiences. And I'm always shocked when I meet parents who haven't shared their experiences with their teens. Like, they need to know a lot of your stories. They really want to know. Now, they may not act like they want to know. And in some ways, we may be luckier in the school or therapeutic or camp settings that, like, either they have to give us a little more respect because we're not their parents, or because, like, they're a little more intrigued by these people who they don't know, as versus their parents, who everything they say, their initial impulse is to say, you don't get it, or whatever it is, a finely honed skill that sometimes starts very young. And I think that teens grow out of that, actually, I've noticed, but it takes a little while. So I would start by suggesting that we in the camping, teachering, parenting space begin by really sort of listening very well and empathizing, but also reflecting back on things that we remember from something that was similar that happened to us, or to our friend, or to our mom, or to someone that we care about. And that really helps, I think, for teens to sort of slow their brain down for a moment. If they can hear, if they're a good auditory listener, then they can kind of be in a calm enough state to hear a story. You have to make sure they're there. The other thing I was thinking about is that we give a lot of instruction to teens. I think a lot about this as someone who works with people with specialized needs, that we just expect them to take direction. And if you've worked in some more institutionalized spaces, or even in the best spaces, there's this feeling that someone with specialized needs, we don't even realize how much it's hard for them to have a voice, and people just kind of tell them what to do. And even in the most well-trained places where we learn the codes of conduct that we have to aim for the highest level behavior, it's tempting to just tell. And I think the other population that gets a lot of that are children, teens, and geriatric populations, where people feel more like they can just tell you what to do. So if you're going to tell a teen what to do, because they are often craving that, just remember, as frustrating as it is, to use kindness. It sounds very basic, but it really changes an entire story. For example, many schools in New York and New Jersey are thinking about going phone free next year, from the public school systems that announced New York is going phone free next year, and a pact that went out with some of the schools in Bergen County area. So there's a lot, and in Metro New York area. So there's a lot of difference in even the way I hear people talk about it. And I'm always thinking that It may be the best idea, it may be the worst idea, who knows? We'll all ride through it together. But it's at least to talk about it with love and respect in terms of the challenges that it may provide. You'll right away get a teen who will then be able to rise better to the occasion if they're not just being sort of told what to do. Hey, step up, be friendly more, talk to more people. Why do I hearing from the school that you're, not socializing so much? Just socialize more. Like, that's all you have to do. Like, if it was that easy, they would do that, right? So if you say, oh, it's so hard for me to hear how hard it is for you to socialize at school. I didn't realize it was that tough. Like, I just didn't realize. And of course, I wish that I could just tell you to socialize more, because that would be like the answer. But let's think about that together. The school's not sure what to do. They've tried a lot of things at the end of the year, and we're not sure what worked, but maybe you and I can think of some things that we haven't thought of before. So there's kind of roles for parents and for schools to just sort of story more, listen more, and also try to be, even when being directive, be a little kinder. And we'll talk about how this plays out in camp also with teens.
I just want to add that, and your last example just now, Rayzel, spoke to this, of the idea of reflective listening. It might sound very simple, but how are we, like you said, not just giving instruction and making statements, but how are we really showing that we are listening to our teens, whether in school, in camp, at home, and reflecting back what we are hearing them say, but also what their body language is showing us, what we are seeing in their actions. Just a second point I want to make is thinking about the idea of what does it mean for each of the teens in our lives to have a trusted adult. That doesn't necessarily mean it is, if you are parents on this webinar tonight, that it is you as a parent, that while that might be hard to stomach, we want to make sure that our middle schoolers and high schoolers have an adult in their life that they trust, that they can go to if they are feeling underwater, right? And that they have that over the summer too, right? So if they have a counselor in school, or they have a teacher in school that they feel comfortable talking to, and maybe that's in addition to their parents, but that they also have that over the summer, right? That we know that we have a toolbox in place of who is helping them out, what is helping them out, so that those coping strategies are there, and that includes someone to talk to, even if it's not someone in the four walls of the house they live in, or in the cabin at camp, or whatever the case may be, but that they have someone they can turn to.
Yeah, I can't emphasize that enough. Thank you so much for bringing that up, Shoshana. I know many camps are really also making great efforts this year and the last few years to really introduce roles within the camp itself, to give campers, to give staff a person to turn to, a person to talk to really help them through things that are going on. I want to ask a different question now. Let's talk a little bit more now about teens that are coming to camp, that are going to be working as staff in camps, especially sleepaway camps. Rayzel, I know you're a head counselor in a camp and you wear many hats throughout the year, but what are some of the unique challenges of teens working in overnight camps?
Funny, lately, as I've been working in my life, over the years, my roles have changed and my age has changed and different things have happened to me. But I feel like I am like the teen advocate. Like, I must explain teens to everybody so that people just can have patience for them and, sort of mute some of the thoughts they've always had about teens and be open to other thoughts about teens, because without losing my amazing staff who has to then work with these teens also and sort of deal with them. But I wanted to point out about teens that you mentioned, teens who are specifically working in camp. Almost without fail, for most of the teens that you will meet working in camp, and camps have really different starting age policies. I just met a camp that hires eighth graders graduating to be counselors for a camp that's an overnight camp, and I was like intrigued by that. They're so young. They're so young. They need to learn so much. But even for a teen that is finishing high school and is starting their first job, for most teens, this is really truly the first real employment they've ever had. And so this is really like a very big summer of firsts that they're about to embark on. And we're asking them to do a lot of things. We're hiring them because they're fun and young and energetic to do the jobs that we don't want to do necessarily, or that we're not the right person to do anymore. And yet we also want them to be responsible and read the rule book and follow all the rules and be really respectful to their supervisors and always say the right thing to their charges and, learn everything about safety and wellness and everything all together, and yet also be like engaging and charismatic and all these things. So I think that's really the most important thing that we should think about in terms of teens coming to work at camp. A real great respect for this really exciting but really significant summer of firsts, and that we have a bit of an obligation to them to help make that a positive experience. It's really not. We can't expect that it's only on them to rise up to all of those pieces. In our camp in Hask, we really feel we run two separate camps for our campers and for our staff. Like, we feel like there are two separate populations that we serve. And we've really grown more into that mission over the year. We used to be made fun of it. Like, why do you have to take care of the counselors? Like, why do counselors need so much? We started getting more calls from parents about counselors over the years than we ever did before. And then we said, you know what? Why are we fighting this? Let's sink into this. Let's serve these two sides of our teens. Let's see that they're both our respected staff and that they also need like care and love, like as if they were a camper. Yeah.
Okay.
So
thank you. Shoshana, could you touch on this idea for teens that are working in day camps?
Absolutely. So I've been fortunate to work with our local day camps in the Miami area the last couple of summers and do trainings with them, as well as provide support as needed over the summer. And it's very interesting because actually one of the first things that came up when the Be Well initiative started working in the community a few years back was the impact of the challenges that were happening with the teen counselors, both the counselors in training, so earlier high schoolers, and even the upperclassmen, people in the counselor group, that of the impacts of COVID and how that impacted their development and how the day camp directors were seeing that. And I imagine some of this has come up in overnight camps as well. And to the point that specifically next week, I'm going to be doing a training at one of our camps that I was asked to do something specifically with unit heads about how to work most effectively with high school counselors, because that was something they have noticed that the unit heads and the specialists have struggled with in past summers, even if these unit heads are in college, right? Not much older than the high schoolers. And so I think that that's something that we need to pay attention to is, and piggybacking off of what Rayzel, you said, is the idea of that they are still kids, right? They are still very much in the prime of their development, and they still want to have fun when they are working at camp. And so I think part of it is building up and giving them opportunities for that leadership and the responsibility and supporting that, but also then cutting them some slack and building in time that they can have fun, that they can have time that they're just with the counselors, that they maybe get some ownership over an activity with their campers so that they can feel empowered, right? That they don't just feel like they're being told that they're not doing something right because they're the younger counselor or whatever the case may be, but that they're really being given chances to be empowered. And I think that we have such a beautiful opportunity in the camp setting with high schoolers, whether day camp or overnight camp, to give them some of that responsibility that they aren't necessarily getting in their day-to-day life, but in a safe way that they're supported, right? That if they make a mistake, it's okay, as long as, of course, it's a safe mistake, but that they have the support to make those mistakes and to learn from them so that they can grow. So that if we are seeing any of those maybe different developmental milestones because of some of the things we have seen with this age population as a result of COVID, and where they were in development during the height of the pandemic, that we are giving them that opportunity to catch up in a way, if there is some lag because of that, and that we're supporting that they understand the right from wrong, right? That they have a responsibility as a camp counselor or a counselor in training, but that they are allowed to do it in a fun way and they are being supported and they are learning every step of the way.
I was going
Thank
to
you.
add one quick thing if I can, which is that unlike many of our first like adult jobs, let's say, where you have more time to prove yourself in most cases, you're not usually just hired for 6 weeks to like make it or break it, like show that you're the best employee on earth. So not only do they have their first summer job, but they have very little time to make mistakes and fix them in the way that humans need. And that's another piece I find also very important, but also a real restriction for camps. Like unlike in a school year, which is, you know, so many months, or a job where you have like different stages of review process and you have an employer who can give you like some feedback to change. And let's see in the next quarter if you can, you know, improve on your response time on the phone calls. But if, you know, a counselor is really not doing well, or their emotional wellness is getting in the way of their job, this is a very hard lesson for teens because often camps cannot do what Shoshana said because we want to do it, but we're just like, we don't have the time. Like if you're not figuring it out 2 weeks in, like it may be the case, and hopefully not, that this just may not work right now for us, for you, for your campers. There's a little too much at stake. And so that's also something I've seen, you know, which is just like an interesting challenge that people don't always think about, you know, in terms of how hard it is also to be, you know, learning in this kind of like fun but also slightly pressured way from a time perspective.
Definitely. We have a question that just came in on the Q&A. How do you define addiction when it comes to phone usage, and how do we best address that for a high schooler? I feel like that's a webinar in and of itself. You know, that's something that many adults are also struggling with. But if we could just keep that in mind from the camp perspective, and just in terms of, you know, the webinar for tonight, does anybody want to comment on that? And we're also welcoming anybody want to put in your questions in the Q&A. We're happy to answer them. Anybody want to comment on, you know, what we're referring to when we talk about phone addiction, and how we can best support our teens with that?
It is a whole webinar on it. I think we have to be really sympathetic, and I also see it with my own children too, as a mom, to our teenagers. They're living in a time of society where phones are just part of everything that we do, and it's so easy to be addicted to it and be consumed by it, and that we don't know how to have fun and be happy and do things without our phones. And there's so many things that are running that we're using the apps in our phones, from Snapchat, social media, TikTok, all these things are going down. And so I think like when it comes to our kids, and it's understanding, trying to help them create boundaries around that, right? And again, when you talk about a high schooler and even a kid that's going to go into camp, like to let go of that thing that's attached to your hand 24/7 is a very big thing. And there's withdrawal that comes with it. I many times hear young people say, oh my gosh, I'm about to go do this. How am I going to do it? So it's trying to help them understand, first of all, validating and recognizing that it's really difficult, and they're living in times where this is the number one thing we're all doing is on our phones, but it's also understanding how do we create boundaries around it, understanding that maybe we limit our times on our phones, limit how we use the apps, maybe also help our high schoolers or our teenagers to make a decision with their friends. Like if you're going to camp with your friends, right, maybe make a plan, make a pact, right? I'm seeing more and more kids young people like to do a pact of let's behave, do a certain thing this way together, not just on your own. So that might be something to consider. But I think it's something that we really have to recognize and understand, that it's that many kids are very much and don't even realize how addicted they are, and even adults who are so addicted and attached to their phones, and it's helping them create those boundaries around it. I feel like there's so much to say on it.
There is, and the positive peer pressure is a huge piece. And I hear from a lot of campers, sorry, not campers, I've heard from camp staff in the past that there are many campers themselves that struggle with this, and kids that sneak in phones and pretend that they don't have their phones when they have their phones, and in the end, everything kind of unravels when these kinds of things happen. Right. But we do have also another, sorry, Sharon, what were you going to say?
I was going to say also, just to keep in mind, I just thought about how this camper told me what they did last year, how they took 2 phones. They took 2 phones to camp, one that you hand in and one that you keep to yourself. that sneaky little thing. And again, that's like so sad that that makes me heartbroken that someone was reduced to behaving in that way, and the sneaky and the lying around it. And so it's just also keep in mind that, and as parents, are we feeding into that behavior? And how can we help them validate their feelings and work through how can we put our phones away or limit our time? If you're a counselor at camp, then you do have, I believe most camps do allow some form of access at certain times of day on your phones, but the campers are not. So again, creating a boundary around that.
Yeah, we actually have a great tip that one of our parents on tonight just sent us, that for any parent who has a child going to camp, especially for staff, buy your child a watch. Okay, a lot of teens today don't wear watches anymore. They just use their phone or their Apple Watch. So just please go out and buy your child a watch, especially if many camps have policies that the camp staff can't use their phones while they're working. But we actually have another question that's just popped up on the chat, and some parents actually encourage what's called the burner phone. So how would you educate? This seems to be a hot topic tonight. How would you educate parents on this? When we're talking about a burner phone, we're talking about, the one phone that you give in and you tell camp that I'm not using my phone, and the other one that's snuck in. And we have heard of many, instances of camps where, kids, everybody in the camp thinks that nobody else has a phone, but then it just things play out in a way that just is not great when there are these burner phones. So any advice on navigating that?
I think that yes. And I think part of it is also thinking about how is the camp putting a policy in place about this that is publicized to the parents. I know, I'm thinking about some of the schools I work with in our community that have instituted some of these no phone policies, or that the students have the lock boxes for their phones during the day. And some of them have shared with me the pushback they've gotten from parents because they need to be able to reach their kids, no matter what, right? If a pickup situation changes or whatnot. And I think that is part of the conversation with the parents, right? Maybe it's before camp, if there is a webinar or some sort of Zoom conversation about your child is coming to work at camp for the first summer, and here are our policies, here are our rules, and here's how we're going to make sure that you can be in touch with your child every X number of days. And then educating, I think, on some of these things about if a few counselors have this burner phone, right? And what does that look like? How does social media play into that? What might be happening with social dynamics when a few counselors have a burner phone and others don't? So part of that education, I think, is probably the implications that thinking that some of these parents who are letting that be okay are not thinking about how that's impacting the greater social dynamics. And even potentially safety, depending on the situation.
Definitely. Thank you. Anybody else want to chime in? Or
I just thought that was a clever approach, because if our parents, hopefully, even though we are all impaired from the same addictions as our kids to some degree in terms of technology use, maybe more so is what the students argue with me, is because they feel like they're digital natives, so they have more tools to handle it, whereas their parents are kind of like, "Woo, like this is all so exciting," and it's like they feel like they're worse off than them. A lot of students have made that case with me, but I think that assuming the frontal lobe piece, like, it's really much harder when you've done a better job sort of informing parents, for parents for kids to have, it gives a little more possibility for them to do that. I was also thinking of this in the addiction space. Like, it is kind of naive for a parent who knows, let's say, that their kid vapes, let's say, that there's that communication level already, to just imagine, like Sharon said, that it's all going to go away when they go to camp. Like, they're not going to get in trouble because they're just all going to, and like to have communication about that with your child, about what, do we need to make a plan about this? Can you actually go to camp and hope? Like, can you even do that? Like, are you, maybe camp isn't for you if you're really not, if we haven't progressed enough that you can't do that. Or, that the phone, I'd like to believe, would be a bit easier, that we could say it's going to be really hard, but you're going to have to do it because this is the policy. This is what they have to do. This is like the rule. I can't, back you if you bring a phone that I didn't authorize. You know, that would be great. That's a very good, I just think it's a clever way to think about it when we have teens who will convince themselves because they're riskier style that they'll get away with it. It'll be okay. It's fine. Everyone does it. You know, it's not a big deal. No one will tell on me. It's good. And then that might be, just think it's a clever approach. Although I know that it's not easy as a parent to do those things either.
Definitely. Okay, we have another question that's just come in. Can you speak to the overall signs and symptoms of a teen struggling that we should keep in mind as the school year is winding down and summer begins? Like, what are the overall signs? What are the red flags for us to keep in mind, whether it's in the school setting, whether it's in the camp setting, or whether just in general, this time of year? What should we be looking out for?
I didn't mute myself, so I'm just going to jump in on one that I just wanted to make sure I didn't forget tonight to say, because a professional who knew I was speaking tonight was just, Rayzel, you got to make sure to mention that as we get closer to the end of the year, one thing to really look out for is disordered eating that is really exacerbating right now. Right now would be in the month before many camps are starting, and now is the time, if there ever was, if something is jumping up, that's a major warning sign without a lot of time to sort of do all the work around that, if it's like a newly heating up flag. So that's just one thing I wanted to say. And that's, an area where we can really help a camp and our teens. If there's something brewing, if it's light, then let's give some education, let's get some help, let's get some advice from a professional, and not to just kind of hope it'll go away. Someone told me today that a lot of times when people send a kid to a therapist, well, hopefully with the child's agreement, and everyone did this, but there's this feeling, okay, you got them, you take care of them. Like some people are wondering, why do you need my input anymore? You're the therapist. And not everyone's like this, of course, but it also strikes me in camp, it's so easy to just say, you've got them. I gave you my kid to camp, and I don't have to think about them for a while. And it would be a nightmare if I did, oh my gosh. So I think just keeping that partnership piece with the camp, that's really not quite how it goes, that we really just totally take over. Although if communication is limited because there aren't phones, then to some degree that is true. but there's this kind of piece to remember. So we're looking out for in the eating space, some of those things. And in the anxiety space, I would also say underlying every anxiety presentation, there's a thinking in the research that there's some unique piece, they're not all the same. It may be that anxiety would have developed no matter what the home life was, or no matter what the life circumstance was, because there's a bit of a nature nurture component to OCD, which is actually not even so much on the anxiety spectrum anymore in terms of conceptualizing treatment, because it's so multifaceted. So it may have happened any which way, but there's usually some trigger or some root or some piece to it that while you have your kid at home or in school, you can still sort of try to think, have we hit it? Have we addressed what is that, kind of piece that we're looking for as anxiety is, let's say, growing or shaping.
Thank you for that. Sharon, we have a question that's come in relating to, can you speak to the reality of ease of access for substance use in camp for teens, whether it's campers, staff? Can you comment on that?
I can. And I've heard so many stories from our CCSA presenters when they tell us all the stuff they've done in camp and when campers share in our school programs. So I think there's multiple levels here when you think about the accessibility of it. I think one, let's just start with understanding in camp life, if there are secluded areas, right? Those kind of places are easy for campers or the counselors to go off, sneak use in those kind of secluded areas that we might not think to go to. So just to keep that in mind when we talk about use, misuse. And then you think about who's bringing it in, right? That it can come from the campers, right? May snuggle it in. And even the staff may be bringing it in who are of age, or just themselves, as we said, they're not ready to give up their love for their substances or whatever use that their use, whether it's addiction or recreational use, is going on, that this is rolling into camp life. So many times there's when you want it, you're bringing it in, and there's so many different ways to bring it in, sadly. And there's also stuff, and the stuff that you can bring in and hide, and there's also stuff that are existent in camp that people will use that we don't necessarily think of. So when I talk about like stash items, I think about stuff like, and it's crazy what people do. But you think about like a hollowed personal care item, like a book. Someone might cut out pages in a book and hide something in it, or tampered food packaging where you think it looks like a regular pack of Oreos, of candies, and someone snuck edibles into it. Water bottles, like some water bottles, not like regular water bottles, but I'm talking like those water bottles where the reusable ones where you can have like, there's a bottom adder underneath there and can be tampered with, and you can hide something in it. Sunscreen, fake medication bottles. It's all these kind of things that we're seeing are being snuck in a different way. And if we're not checking it properly, it just makes its way in so easily. And it's done sometimes as a camper might say, oh, my friend wants to send me a package, mommy, and you're coming to visiting today, can you just bring that for me? So it's things like that happen, that come in a way. And sometimes people don't know what to look for. If you don't know what to look out for, if you're not checking in that way, it just makes it way organically. And also the staff are bringing it in, and sometimes staff are young themselves, and they might be sharing it with their friends who are campers. And so I've heard a lot of that, those crossovers of how it makes its way in. And then we're talking about the popular things that really do make their way in, which we have heard that alcohol, it comes in, it's hidden. We're talking about the vape pens make their way in. I had last year a camp, unfortunately, a camp did not realize they were, the camp counselors and the staff administration, because they're a different generation, they were thinking about vaping. They weren't thinking about vaping, they were thinking about smoking. So they were looking for cigarettes. They weren't looking for vapes or the vape pens. It's again, rechanneling that if you're an older person who is supervising this, to just put yourself on that teen level of what to look out for. When we talk about the vape pens, make it in, whether it's got marijuana, THC in it, delta-8, and then we're seeing the misuse of over-the-counter medications is a very common misuse over that, like medicine. Like cough medicine is a very common thing. It's happened in previous season camps when campers thought it was okay to drink cough medicine. And sadly, you can overdose on that. We're seeing Sharpies are very common for sniffing, huffing. Again, anything that's smelly in that way. Aerosol cans, the spray cans, again, those are easy things that kids will bring in, and we think it's okay, but it's very common to misuse, and it happens in the bunk when no one's thinking anything. And these are just our everyday products. So just when you look at what comes in, it's not just alcohol or vapes. Yes, those are the ones that we think of, but think about the other stuff of the Sharpies, the cough medicines, the glue, sniffing glue. It's very common, especially we've seen that statistically in middle school, we see the misuse. And when I say middle school, we're saying like 7th, 8th grade, we're seeing those kind of products being misused. Again, it's not always many, but we're seeing a small percentages rolling into our Jewish community.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. Really, you clearly have a lot of experience in this area. And I just think it's so important for our camp staff to just really be educated as to what are the latest trends, because, you know, if you see something, say something. I think really that's one of the common threads of tonight's webinar. You know, when you know something's not right, it's usually, you're usually attuned to something. So right. I do want to just ask a different kind of question now. In the last few years, there's been a big push in camps to create what we call safe spaces, right? For our teenagers, whether they're staff, whether they're campers, to really be able to share and access support. And there's a lot of incredible initiatives that are happening in a lot of camps. You know, even in day camps, we have things called camp friends that are people that are, you know, being integrated more into the fabric of camp. what have you all found works in creating these safe spaces in the camp environment? And if you could also just give us some practical tools, some practical suggestions for how do we create these safe spaces for staff and for campers, and how do we really not just create them, but also sustain them throughout the summer?
I'm happy to speak a little bit to this. So I think I want to share an example from one of our day camps in the Miami area that I'll be working with this summer, who they created a few years ago what they call a restoration station for their counselors. So they have a room in the Jewish Community Center that they decorate really nicely. It has comfy places to sit. They put up nice decorations, and they have different tools in that room that if the staff want to just go and relax, that's fine. But they also have, like mindful coloring pages. They are putting in this year, they consulted with me about like what kind of mindfulness activities or anxiety or stress reducing activities can we have like posted up that people can pull from. And so I think that they have created a framework that their staff now know that this is something they in a day camp setting they require them to take, I think, at least a 30-minute break, that they're not with their campers every day, and of course they ensure there's coverage. And so they can go in there, they can go outside, right? Like they have time. And I think that it is giving this opportunity for them to feel appreciated and to feel seen. It sounds really simple, but that there is this designated place for the counselors to have a break from the campers, right? No matter how fun camp is, it can still be stressful. And I think, we've touched on the fact that for our teen counselors, for some of them, this is their first job. And so it can feel like a lot for them, right? It's a lot of responsibility that they aren't necessarily used to. So it's giving the opportunity that they can feel appreciated, they can feel supported. And it's in that camp in particular, I will also be there a couple days a week during the summer as a mental health professional doing training with programming with the campers. But then also have like office hours, basically, that if the counselors want to come to me to talk about an issue, or just to chat, whatever the case may be, that I'm sort of this outsider that they can come and talk to, that it's not going to get them in trouble or anything like that, that we can problem solve, that they can have someone to listen to them. And we'll see, right? This is the first summer we're doing this with camps. I know a lot of sleepaway camps have a structure like this in place, and actually it's more and more common in day camps now. But that it's showing them that the camp cares, right? And it's coming from the top down, that this isn't just about the campers and the counselors all working together to make sure the campers have the best summer, but it's also about the counselors feeling supported and having a great summer as well.
I'm going to jump in on this. I love that restoration station idea. We did a little bit of renovation in our camp last summer, and it led to a unique thing that happened, that some people were displaced from their usual workspaces, and we lost some shade and some seating. And we really underestimated the hit that this would have on our staff, because great, so you have your time off. Now, where do you go for shade or seating if we're lacking? Just kind of lost that ability to, even in our beautiful grounds, we had to do some quick thinking and try to sort of adapt. And we've been working on it for this summer also, to like return back to some increased, just as simple as shade and seating, for our staff to have a moment to breathe. But I also think along these lines, two things. One is like repeat practices. So the restoration station is like every day, it's always there. You have 30 minutes, you can use it. Shoshana's coming in, here's the day Shoshana comes in, here's when she comes, like we know when she's available. For us, it looks like we have, weekly staff meeting that's like pretty like immovable, like it won't move. We really try not to cancel it or move it unless we really, really must. So there's like a predictability. If you need that, if you like that ability to sit down, you get to listen, be with all your peers, learn what's happening in camp, get some feedback about things upcoming. It's like some people dread it, some people love it, but it's a very grounding, very, very predictable part of camp where you get to listen. we do, and of course I think most I think quality camps nowadays have put in some kind of mental health care built into the structure, that you know who the person is, you know where to find them, you know their hours, you know how to reach them, and they have some kind of system that is predictable to you. In HASC also, we've done something, actually this may be something I'll say later, but we have something where we've had like fireside chats on topics. Those are optional, but they're also on a somewhat predictable schedule, so you kind of know if you're someone who wants to hear more about a topic or talk to our behavior team or our therapy team, you get to do that. And the TOTA spaces also work well for that. There's like a nightly cheer at this time, a week meet up at this time with that teacher that you like. There's kind of like feeding the soul a little bit along with feeding the body. And lastly, and not to be underestimated, which you keep saying, the fun, but everyone's budget is different, and everyone's creativity can affect the budget also, in terms of, we have one amazing recreation staff person that can create an entire program out of $0. Don't know how he does it, and it's amazing, and he makes it fun. But staff appreciation is just, it's not a silly thing for teen staff. It's not a silly thing for adult staff either, but it's like a crucial component of camp. And it doesn't always have to look like the most expensive swag. I know one camp that the head counselor has these brownie bars. I don't know if those are like ubiquitous in every Jewish community. They're like the Reisman's brownie bars. They're like these white bars with chocolate fudge inside and a swirl of chocolate on top. It's like a kosher snack. I don't know. And she keeps them in her like porched office, and like if someone had a hard day or someone had an amazing day, it's like a brownie bar moment. You can come and say, I get a brownie bar. I had this, kind of thing happen, either for good or for bad, that you could sort of do that, and my food professionals might say that's not the best to always only use food. So try to make it multifaceted. There's music, there's opportunities, there's shade, there's sports. There's just a lot of focus on appreciation, because that is really worth it for a teen. The worst thing that can happen to a middle schooler, for many middle schoolers, you get promised a reward and you don't get it, right? The teacher who didn't own up to the thing that they said they were going to do. For certain kids, like that's just like, that's it. They lost their trust. So for our staff, also offering them the mental health safe spaces and the physical safe spaces and the fun spaces. And this has really helped our camp to be able to know that they have a chance to be healthier and to reset themselves for the next day or the next hour for the hard work that they do.
Yeah, I think that feeling, that appreciation, feeling seen and heard is really key. And I also know that when we promise, talking about, promising kids things, and then the kids will follow up with you to try to remind you, right, about that thing that you promised them. But we have a question that's come in on the chat, and anybody else, if you want to drop your questions in the Q&A, you're welcome to. How are people weaving in well-being in general, weaving in mental health within the general fabric of camp, right? Camp is not school. Everything in camp is about fun. It's about just, action-packed, whatever it might be. How are people, practically speaking, weaving in just general well-being within the camp setting, whether it's day camp, whether it's overnight camp? What are you seeing and what are you hearing?
I wait for Shoshana on these, but I'm going to say something and then Shoshana will add some great stuff. We're not as great at this as we wish to be, but we've been trying to think of a way to build in some kind of like formal daily pause or meditation somewhere along the way. Our camp is just a bit too unpredictable in terms of like the unifying way to do this. Some of it, the Jewish religion builds in with prayer opportunities. Like if you can catch them in our camp, it's not easy. Not everyone gets to do that because they're not always able to do so if the campers, are on the predictable way. But like I said, the optional talks and the wellness built in, for us, we rely heavily on our mental health professionals. We really do. But we also feel like we staff very high in camp. And I know not everyone can do this, and we're very lucky that we can do this. But the high staff camper ratio builds in the well-being. And I don't just mean staff on campers, I also mean staff, supervisory staff to teenage staff, so that you not only can go to the mental health professional, you also know that your division head or your unit head and your assistant division head will be there for you when you need to take a break. And we do a lot of training and orientation about speaking up to your staff, that is not a weakness to speak up to each other and say, I need to take a break, or I want you to tell me if you think I need to take a break, like if you think I'm not hearing that. Even in careful planning about time off, how time off is used, I find that some campers are like a little kept in the dark, and some campuses, like they don't understand exactly how their day offs work and like where their time is or what they can do, especially if they don't have phones or they're not really drivers and they're not on their own calendar. So like a clear sort of old-fashioned, maybe even bulletin board that is updated regularly, that you can look at. My favorite thing about Camp 100 million years ago was when I was a staff member in Camp Hask, was the phone booth, which was a payphone booth, 2 of them, and people would take messages and hang them on the wall. This makes me really 100 years old, so I know I'm outing myself, but people were really funny on the wall. So they'd put like messages up from everyone's grandmother, aunt, uncle, loved one, romantic friend, camp friend, whatever it was. And then people would make like fake messages, to kind of like rib each other, this kind of things. And it was just a fun piece of camp, that was just a small, silly thing. So if you could replicate that, like on the canteen wall, like something that just allows for like expression, you could put up something there that you can post funny messages, nice messages, hopefully. But there's different ways to weave this in. And I'd love to hear what Shoshana's seeing in Florida and from her years of youth and camping experience in Sharon too.
I love that thing for many years ago. And I think that speaks to also, it could be such a great idea of like promoting positive well-being and mental health, of like a wall that is able to be graffitied, right? Or on a poster, right? If we don't want to graffiti the wall, that, you have a prompt that has to do with well-being, right? Or positive emotions, or being a cheerleader for someone else, right? Whatever the case may be. And I think obviously, like, we'd have to think through this idea more of how do we sort of filter and make sure they're all appropriate and nice to be putting up. But I think it's also thinking about, from the well-being perspective overall, and like social emotional learning perspective, right? Whether we're talking about our teens or what are our teen counselors doing with younger campers as well, of how is that integrated into every camp day, right? And so I've brought up what I'll be doing this summer. Part of what I'll be doing is that programming with campers that is going to be all around social emotional learning and positive well-being, and integrating that into a camp framework, and doing that through if your camp has weekly themes or anything like that, right? Doing it through those themes. I know, Rayzel, you shared when we initially met about different things that your camp does in relation to, leadership and color war and different overall well-being tools that can be integrated into every day, right? Rayzel, you mentioned starting the day with something, right? It's not always easy to do that, but is there a particular activity in the day that you can weave a mindfulness practice into? That it can be something fun, right? It can be something different every day. It can be something related to movement. It can be something related to breathing, right? That it's really just giving tools and teaching them through a camp lens, right? Doing it in a fun way, that all of a sudden people whether counselors or campers, right, might walk away from the summer weaving these things into their everyday life because it's this fun camp thing they're bringing back home. So it doesn't have to be called mental health. It doesn't have to be called well-being, but it can be woven in a camp way that is super fun and leaves everyone with new ideas and tools to take into their everyday life.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Sharon, I have a question for you that's come in. We've been speaking a lot about teens who are going to camp. What about teens that are not signed up for camp this summer, right? Teens, whether they're going to be home for the summer or whether they're not attending camp, or they may not have as much structure in their day, what advice would you give to people who are supporting them?
I think that when it comes to those who are staying at home is I think there's a few components that come with it. Is one about still creating that structure of getting up every day, doing things, and thinking about what does that structure look like, whether they're getting a job or they're volunteering. I think creating that structure so they're not just bumming around and hanging around. And sometimes our kids need that. Sometimes they do need, certain kids do need, I need time out from school life, camp life, the pressure, whatever, I just can't do it. And so understanding that when they need that space and they've said it, is for us to be able to listen to them and identify creating that safe space where they feel emotionally supported, but also not breaking away from trying to help them create together in partnership with your child, creating together a partnership of what can we do for you to have a good, successful summer without just hanging around, isolating, being withdrawn, or hanging out with friends. And literally sitting together and talking it through with your child to figure out those next steps in the summer and figuring out what are fun things they can do. Right. And some of it's fun, like I'm watching a movie, I'm hanging out with my friends, but it's also something, those meaningful moments of volunteering or having a day job and having that structure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think our time is coming to a close. So we're going to offer a rapid fire question to each of our panelists. And I'd love to ask each of you, what is one key takeaway that you have from tonight's webinar? Just one. Or if you want to share more, one key takeaway that you'd love to share from tonight's webinar and thinking about supporting our teens as they're heading out to the summer, whether they're going to camp, whether they're not going to camp, whatever their plans might be. What is one key takeaway that you have?
I'll stop because I'm unmuted. I think for me, as just being in this world of addiction and mental health and understanding that if you are a parent that really does understand that your child might be struggling with an addiction or just using a substance or their mental health, is to have those open discussions about transitioning into camp life and or transitioning out of school and into that next stage of summer. And having that open discussion with your child and moving across and how you can be of support to them, how camp can be of support to them, and addressing those challenges, because those challenges come with you wherever you go. They're not going to be fixed when you go to camp or do something else. So it's how we have those conversations with our children and not judging them with what's going on.
I'll just do my quick takeaway, which is I started with the differences between, how everyone's so unique, and not to judge teens as one, uniform piece, but that, like you have the competing, like comfort addiction of modern generation. We want our bed, our phone, our comfortable stuff and all that stuff. And then the pressures of the perfection seeking, the kids who are on that fast pace still. We have a lot of kids that are still on that fast pace to perfection. They kind of like compete in my mind. They're like, it's interesting how they all live in the same world, but just really the way that we can address both is, I'm just stuck on this empathy perspective right now to really try to push ourselves to take away empathy tonight. And as hard as that is, to grow in that area so we can understand our teens with the most chance of getting through.
I started with this idea of meeting each teen where they are, similar to what Rayzel said, of they're each their own unique human being. And the idea of empathy, as Rayzel said, is so important. And whether as parents, as professionals working with teens this summer, being able to see every single one of the teens in your life as a unique individual who needs that empathy, who needs that care, but also does, if it's in a workspace, does need someone that is encouraging them, right, to take on that leadership and to take the responsibility, while also giving that care and concern that we all deserve.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. You'll be receiving an email shortly with a link to a survey. Please complete it. It really helps us grow. And just want to remind everybody that this webinar was brought to you by OHEL's Camp Support Helpline. We are a helpline that is open to youth support professionals, educators as well. In the summer, we're open from Monday through Wednesday, 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we'll be sending you more information about that. Thank you so much to all of our incredible panelists tonight. And we wish everybody who's attending tonight a really safe, happy, and successful summer. Thank you, everyone. Good night.